And welcome back to the Genesis Science Report. I'm David Rives, and we have been talking about the age of design. We say that you are designed, that all of the information that is being learned within the scientific community over the past 50 or more years is all pointing to complexity, to order, to engineering, and to design. Now, joining me is Dr. James Tour, who has a gift of connecting the pieces, explaining what it takes for life to work. And we have gone through this extensive process of basic life and how it really can't happen through prebiotic forces and nature itself. Dr. Tour, thank you so much for joining me for the past sessions that we have done. And I really want this to be a wrap-up of everything that we've learned so far. So if you could, spend a moment and talk about the issue of the origin of life.
Okay, so the issue here is that we need 4 classes of compounds which we don't know how to make, and we don't even know how to make the small molecules that make up those 4 classes of compounds if we restrict ourselves to what would have been available on an early Earth. Inherent within each one of those classes of compounds is a code, is an informational code. DNA has a code based on its order. RNA has a code based on its order, which it normally gets from DNA. Then when it transcribes that information into a protein, the protein has that informational code. And then when those proteins make other molecules like the polysaccharides, those polysaccharides bear a code. And in fact, you can store more information in a polysaccharide than you can even in DNA. And so it can get information from the outside in these ways. So it's just an information problem as well. And then enzymes also are used to build the lipids. And now when lipids form within a lipid bilayer in a cell, there's an ordering of those lipids. In other words, you get domains of structure. It's not all the same all the way around. You get domains of structure, and those domains are constantly moving over the surface of that cell. There's a moving on the interior, and there's a moving on the exterior, and moving on the interior as well. And that also is a bearer of information, and they change throughout the life of the cell. It's a huge information system. Nobody knows where the inherent information came from. Now, what you have to do is you have to have these working together in concert. And so all of these have to work in coordination with one another. And so there's a huge assembly problem. How do you have just to have a train doesn't work. I mean, you have to have lots of trains working together, and they need to know when to start, when to stop, when to go, when to stop, or else there's massive accidents if the trains are not coordinated. This is happening multi-scale within a cell. All of this has to happen, and it has to happen at the right time. You have to have the right molecules being made at the right time. For molecules for things to form in a cell, you have to have the right enzymes being made at that particular time for the function that the cell needs. And then those enzymes get broken back down into amino acids and turned into other enzymes that are needed for the cell for that construction. And so it's a huge factory going into a cell. So everything we've covered so far has just been the individual entities. We couldn't get that in Origin of Life. We have no idea how these start coordinating with one another. There's a lot of traffic cops that go from the non-coding DNA, the non-coding parts of the DNA, which is called the intergenic DNA, which they used to be called junk DNA, but they're no longer called junk because these are the things that are the regulation sites that tell us when to turn things on. These are the traffic cops, when to turn it on and when to turn it off in the cell so that you can have the right things at the right time. This is just even in a single cell. And all of this is needed for the origin of life. Now, why would researchers not talk about this type of thing? Why do they keep publishing papers that say we're on the verge of where they overblow this, and then it gets to the press to say we're on the verge of solving this origin of life problem? Or why do the textbooks, even to the graduate level, say that life came out of a primordial soup pond where none of the models work? That is more of a philosophical issue. Yeah. Why do researchers do this? Is it because they want to keep their money flowing, or is it because they have totally deceived themselves with their own work, and then when they're challenged on it, they have no answer? So one of the things that's telling is that none of them will challenge me in a conversation on these points. They don't even want to have a public discussion with me based on these points, because there is no answer to any of this. And in their heart of hearts, they know how far they are from being able to solve these things, because the target gets further away every year that we understand the more complexity in a cell that has to be there. And it's not like you can say, well, back the earliest of cells were extremely simple. We already know what the earliest cells look like. First of all, because we can find them in the fossil record, and they're about the same complexity as our simplest cells today, number one. Number two, biophysicists have already calculated how simple a cell could be to still be useful. You can back calculate what functions can you get rid of. And if you go back to a cell that could never survive on its own, because it has to get all the exogenous amino acids from the outside, even with that, even with the simplest of cells, it has to have about 15 higher order structures. In other words, structures that are made out of these 4 different components. And of these 15 higher order structures, none of them have been made in any origin of life scenario. And then once you have all of them, you can't just throw them on the inside of a lipid bilayer and expect them to work any more than you could take all the parts of the engine in your car, take it apart into all its individual parts, and throw that all into the driver's seat and shut the door and say, well, if I shake this up enough, the engine will reform. It doesn't. All of these have to have a specific order to them. And these are the non-covalent interactions. And there's astronomical numbers that have to be solved in order to get this thing to be solved. So much so that it could never form in the lifetime of billions and billions and billions of universes. All of these are problems that have to be solved. So again, it's this philosophical problem as to why am I the only one or a few people saying these problems that know this in this area. And one of the reasons is because the scientific establishment itself makes it hard on people that oppose the status quo. If you're going to oppose the status quo, if you're a young assistant professor, it could cost you your job. It's hard to get your papers published if you try to publish papers that oppose the status quo. It could make it very hard to get funding, and what happens is the community starts coming against you, and then the community does what it can do to keep you from getting certain grant money, so you can't continue your field. And then there's other people like YouTubers that come against you on YouTube that will call you liars, that will call you different things, so that it makes your life a little bit less enjoyable in that sense. So who wants to get involved in such a thing? Why even open your mouth? Why not just let it go? And that's where many people have said, why even fight this thing? So that's kind of synopsis from small molecule all the way to the philosophical endpoint.
I love it. And you've mentioned multiple times trains and these traffic engineering principles. So let's get philosophical for just a second. Do you think that this type of engineering that we've seen, that you've described so far, do you personally think that could have been created by chance, or do you think there's design involved?
Well, we already know from the calculations that have been done, we already know it could not happen by chance. It could not have happened by chance. So whenever I present the science, I do not use the intelligent design or God of the gaps argument, because there's enough science that screams out your little models don't work. But if the randomness of chance is off the table, then there's going to have to be something else. Then you have to put on the table, well, maybe there was an intelligent designer. You'd have to put that on the table. Or you could say that we are too far from the target. in 1,000 years, we might have more understanding that would allow us to understand how these things could have happened. And the reason I say that is this. If you asked a man or a woman in the year 1700, will we ever be able to put people on the moon and bring them back again? They would have had no context for this. They would have said, we can't even fly, let alone space flight, let alone all the way to the moon. I mean, it would have made no sense to them. They could not have fathomed how in 300 or 400 years you would get space flight and put people on the moon. The whole interconnectivity of being able to speak over an internet, none of this would have had context. That's why, as a scientist, I cannot say that it absolutely therefore had to have come from an intelligent designer. All I can say is that right now it is the only other thing that we can put on the table. But I don't know what the world is going to know in 500 or 1,000 years. Yeah. That's all I can say. That's as far as I can go on it.
Well, scientific research has revealed an incredible complexity and order to everything within a biological world, which I believe is leading us towards a conclusion that you are designed. That's what we want to leave you with through this whole Age of Design series that we've been doing. Dr. Tour, thank you so much for visiting with us today. Do you have any last comment that you want to share?
Well, I just want to share that I am not the only one that sees this. There are many others that see it, but they don't want to speak up because of the ramifications from the community of speaking up like this. Yeah. But again, what I am seeing, what I see is that we're nowhere close to solving this problem. Yeah. It is an amazing design system, so much so that even biologists now are using that word designed. It is not just restricted to Christians using that word. Yeah. It is biologists themselves that they'll say there is this appearance of design. It is looking like design. There's so many things that have to be coordinated for a biological system to work that they're seeing it, but they're very careful to couch this. They don't know where that design came from, but they're talking about it. So little by little, I think actually this whole area of origin of life is going to come crashing down within a couple of decades. It's just going to be exposed for what it is, for the scam. It really is a scam for what it is. But I'll close with that.
If you had any piece of advice that you would give to a young biologist, a young chemist who is currently going through university, who is faced with this type of a challenge, to embolden them to look towards real science and not be held back by antiquated theories, what would you tell them right now?
I would say don't just do the same thing that origin of life researchers are doing. Yeah. Think of some new approach where you take, for example, a cell and you, like Craig Venter has been doing, taking pieces out of it and seeing what's needed to get it to operate. That's a much closer thing to do. And the other thing that I would encourage you to do is that if you have not seen the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, if you've not seen that, you can send me an email to tour@drjamestour.org, tour@drjamestour.org, and we'll get together and I'll share with you. But this is just for people who do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I'll show you some of that evidence. And I think after an hour you'll come out believing that, because there we have strong evidence that that man rose from the dead. And the other thing I'll say is I do have a YouTube channel, Dr. James Tour, and it's Instagram and Facebook and on all of these different platforms where you can hear a lot more, with a lot more detail, of the problems of origin of life, and then also details about more about the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we can go to Dr. James Tour, drjamestour.org. We can find you on YouTube. We can find you on a lot of the other socials. And I would encourage our audience, go check this out. It is important information, and I believe that it's pointing us to a much bigger picture, an incredible picture of this design that you are designed. Dr. Tour, thank you so much for joining us today. For all of you who wish to seek the truth, please follow Dr. Tour. Visit us at ageofdesign.org. Check out YouTube's, all of our social medias as well, and share this with your friend. That is it for today, and I want to thank you for joining us on the Genesis Science Report. Until next week, I want to remind you to keep looking up. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God.